Alright, guys, today we're talking about something a lot of you have asked for: how to conduct better interviews. In one of my latest videos, I spoke about how important it is to have characters for your film, and especially characters with a story. And because you need characters for your documentary film, you also need these characters to share their story. And this is the best done through interviews. Interviews are an essential part of most documentaries. And in order to conduct good interviews, you need to learn how to ask right questions or good questions. Because if you don't, what can happen is that you will end up conducting long interviews just to find out later in the editing process that you don't have the answers that you needed or that you don't have a story, which will result in you wasting everyone's time and not having the story that is so essential for a documentary film. On the other hand, if you learn how to ask the right questions in your interviews, you'll be able to create great documentary films that connect with the audience, touch on a human and emotional level. And this skill is also transferable when you're creating branded content pieces, podcasts, customer reviews, and anything where you basically need people's testimonies. And so now that you hopefully understand how important interviews are, let me share a few questions that will help you become a better interviewer. So first of all, in order to be able to ask good questions, you first need to be a good listener. Because it is through listening that you will figure out what matters to character, which direction to take when asking the questions, and you will give the character space to express themselves. So first of all, try to become a good listener. And some people are good listeners from nature, for example, introverts, but some people, usually extroverted people, for them it might be difficult to be quiet and they want to jump in and they want to ask questions. So try to control yourself a little bit, and rather than always jumping into the conversation, just stay quiet and listen. As you will be searching for your character and getting to know the character and finding out if they have a story, you will probably be doing a lot of pre-interviews. And I think it is especially with pre-interviews where it's important to be a good listener and to be able to kind of read the nuances in the conversation and direct the conversation in the ways where you feel it should go, where it's important. For this, you don't need to have a structure because from my experience, pre-interviews are usually more of a conversation between you and the character, but you definitely want to be very careful when listening here. Another tip is to keep an eye contact as much as you can. And I think it goes back to the listening, because if you're really interested in someone's conversation and in what they're saying, you want to show them that. And you can show it through eye contact. When having an eye contact with a person, you don't even have to be talking, but you express that you're listening. You can be nodding, you can be smiling, so facial expressions, and that person will be much more likely to share intimate stories with you when they know that you actually care and that you're interested. So eye contact when doing interviews, very important. Even if you have questions, for example, on an iPad or a notebook, always try to look at the questions as little as possible and just keep that eye contact going. So active listening and being engaged through eye contact and mimics will definitely help you with any type of interviews or conversation. And now let's finally jump to actually asking the question and what questions to ask. So first of all, you want to be prepared for the interview, because if it's the main interview for the documentary, you just don't want to wing it and you just don't want to have a conversation which is aimless. So you want to be prepared, you want to have questions. And the way that I like to prepare for these interviews is that I want to make sure that I ask a balanced mix of factual questions and emotional questions. So factual questions would be what, who, when, where, and emotional questions would be questions about why, how, for example, how a certain situation made that person feel, how did they try to overcome a certain struggle, why does this matter, is there a personal backstory, why this matter, and basically ask about challenges, emotions, feelings. This is where you will get the stuff that connect with audiences on an emotional level. But having just emotional questions is not enough, because you also want to set context. And so for context, it's the factual questions. That is, what, when, where, and so on and so forth. So make sure when you're preparing your questions, you have a good mix of factual and emotional questions. So you can create a much more complete story or much more complete image of the character's story. Now, when asking these questions, I'm just going to reiterate to be a good listener and to give time to people to answer. Because it is usually when you are quiet that people will dig deeper into their emotion and into what really happened, and they might give you some very emotional or some very strong answers after you being quiet. So if I give you an example, maybe I'll ask someone, could you guide me through what exactly happened on the 25th of November 2018? And I know that it's an important date for that person. And so they will go through that, but I really want to let them go through it. I really want to let them go into details, and they will most likely not do it if once they finish the answer, I'll just jump straight in. So when they finish an answer, just give them some time without talking, maybe just nodding. And if they're not answering, if they're not starting to bring up something important that you maybe know it happened, you could just ask them anything else or what else. And that's kind of a little nod that you can give the person to continue and to develop that answer. Now, there's a really good book that you can use to improve your questions. The book is called The Coaching Habit, and I'll leave a link in the description below. The book is for coaches, but I can tell you that it is extremely valuable book, even for filmmakers and for people that want to ask poignant questions. Now, another tip I would give you is to not be afraid to ask for shorter answers. And this might be especially important when you're doing branded content, or short documentaries or client testimonies, because sometimes people have the tendency to, talk a lot, to describe what happened to them in quite a lot of detail. And as I said, sometimes it is important, but sometimes we really want to extract that most important thing out of it. So when they finish with the long answer, don't be afraid to say, this was amazing, thanks so much, now I really understand. Do you think that you could give me the same recap, but just in 2 or 3 sentences? And usually they will be happy to do it, because sometimes even themselves feel that they were talking a lot. So bringing this back and trying to get a little more coherent and shorter answer is something that you shouldn't be afraid to ask for. So another tip would be to be kind and friendly to the people that you're interviewing. You're trying to have a conversation with them. It's not an interrogation. And also, before you even start the interview, try to build that relationship. Talk to them about normal things, how they're doing. Maybe you can talk about how you're doing today. So you create that, human connection between you and them. And then the whole interview will be much easier. At the same time, the next tip I'm going to give you is to not to be afraid to push a little bit. Let me explain what I mean by that. For example, what can happen is that you're doing an interview and you know that in the pre-interviews, the subject has said something very important or very authentic, something that would improve the film. So in a case like this, where he said it in the pre-interviews, but he doesn't repeat it on the day of the main interviews, you could say something like this. I remember that on the pre-interview last week, you mentioned something about blah, 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 blah. Would you mind guiding me through that one more time? So this way you can kind of help them memorize what they were talking about the week ago or 2 weeks ago, whenever the pre-interviews happened, and then bring that up in the main interview. So that's what I mean by pushing a little bit. And so all these things that I just mentioned will not only help you with making better documentary film interviews, but they can also help you with making better branded content films, better customer reviews, better success stories, better podcasts, and so on and so forth. So definitely practice them. And just to recap, first, become a good listener. Second, have an eye contact with the character. Be engaged. Listen to them carefully, even if you have your notes. You want to have those notes in your mind rather than on the paper, and you want to give your all attention to the character. 3. Ask a balanced mix of factual and emotional questions to create a better coherent story. 4. Read The Coaching Habit. 5. Don't be afraid to ask for shorter recaps of the answers, especially if you're working on branded content, or especially if you need the answers to be short, 2 to 3 sentences. 6. Make sure to pause, and that goes back to being an active listener. So make sure to pause and give the character the time to answer. And 7 and 8, be kind and friendly, create that bond, that human relationship before you start the interview, but also don't be afraid to push for certain answers if you know that they already gave you these answers in the pre-interview. So hopefully this video was helpful for you guys. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. And as always, I'll see you next Tuesday with a new video. Peace!